My name is Ann Kearsley, and this is my drawing aesthetic. Attention is this really big issue for not only for the work, but for being able to exercise my own attention. And clients, I'm getting paid. I don't own any of these places, so it's this dance between paying attention to them and letting them lead, and making sure that I keep a sort of ongoing talking to myself record of, okay, there's a this and there's a that, and I noticed this and I stepped up here and I stepped down there. And that's really what a sketchbook is for. We teach sketchbooks to our students as this very important tool. And I have realized that they have much more leisure to go to a site and be sketching while on site. And I have kind of lost that leisure because I'm with the client and I can't say, would you just kind of pipe down for a minute because I'm trying to concentrate on this. But before I go to a project site, I will do a little research. Thank God for Google Earth. It's changed everything about the work. And when I have especially if I have a pretty large site, but even if someone just calls me, I will say, what's the address? And while we're talking, I will be looking, and I can learn a lot from just looking through at the aerials. This is a big project I just started out in Western Maine, and normally I would have a lot of different projects in a book, but this is going to go on for a long time. They've asked me to do a master plan. It's about 220 acres, I think. And they have this sort of long-term vision. So this will be something that rolls out over a period of time. So fortunately, they do have this, it's a survey, but it's done with something called LiDAR. LiDAR is when you have a plane flies over and pings radar off of the Earth's surface, and it tells, the information it gets back is the elevation of that. So these large property topographic plans are done by a flyover. And this client happened to have this already done, which was super helpful. So I can look at the Google Earth image and this LiDAR image of the site and really understand a lot about how the landscape is formed, especially how water moves. But I knew this was an old farm, and so I'm also looking at where are things like potentially old pastures, where this was heavily logged, so super steep slopes might not have been logged as much. So places to look for and look out at. But I bring these along with me. This is my orientation, and in this case, I did a little quick sketch of from that LiDAR image, just to say, okay, this is where there's a big hill. This is in the foothills of the White Mountains, so this is much higher than this. They own both sides of the street, and it goes down into this series of streams that are also part of the property, and it's created a big swamp. I later found out that some person upstream did some damming, and that's part of where the swamp is there. But this just orients me, even though what we're going to talk about is this area here with the existing farmhouse. So then, in this case, we're only really looking at this one, this area which has these old buildings in it. We didn't go out, the first visit, we didn't go out into the larger landscape at all. And we're talking about where to site this house. They want to make a very small little cabin out there. They want to take down the existing buildings, and there's a barn across the street that they want to dismantle and move onto their property. So this first visit is about their house site and where should this go and why and what's convenient and what happens to the landscape in the process of building that house. So when I'm out there, I'm looking at how the water is moving. So I noticed that there's this really wet area where they were thinking of putting their driveway. And you don't want to put your driveway where it's wet, but also if this is where they wanted to put the house and this is looking south into this existing clearing, you don't want to have that be where your cars are. So we go through this whole discussion about how about if we try moving this further up to the area that's already been disturbed. So this drawing that I've done is a post site visit drawing. It's summarizing the conversation that I had with them and things questions I have about what to pay attention to, potential things like this path down to one of the streams starts right at the top of the house site. So that would be something to incorporate into a plan. They'd already designed the septic field. I have to find out like what the elevations of that. There's a couple of trees here, a big oak, a big apple. And the client had this wonderful comment. She said, looking out from this little bump of what is the house site, there's a path out in the woods that you can see from looking out from where the house would be. And she just said, I really like being able to see that. And that's actually an important part of the sort of experiential understanding of landscape, is that we can project ourselves into spaces that we may not actually be in, and that contributes to our understanding of the place we are in. There's a sense of a place beyond where we are. So that comment by the client was actually very important to thinking through how are they going to make this new house site integral to this landscape. We talked a lot about, there's one of my skill sets, I guess, or experiences, is that I know a lot about construction, because I started out my business as a design build business, and I physically built my work. And I've driven the backhoe. I'm terrible at driving the backhoe, but it taught me how to read a really good operator. So one of the things that traditionally happens during construction is that the site gets trashed, and you have these landscapes in Maine where people have just looked for 10 years for their perfect house site, and it's, you know, on a lake, and it's on top of all this ledge. If you've ever gone up to Moosehead or any of these places, you see this like 18 inches of soil and then a big rock. You know, it's very delicate, these landscapes, very easily damaged and almost impossible to repair. So one of the things I try to do is control the damage beforehand, and that you only damage things that are either already damaged or that are relatively straightforward to fix. So this drawing is a kind of notation about, well, if we put the barn here, and this is a little further on in the thought process. They're in the process of taking down this farmhouse. You can build temporary construction roads using fabric and gravel, and that limits the compaction. And this is what this is about, is how can we get this road that gets us back into that house site that I was showing you earlier. So how do we get back here without trashing all of this woodland you have to cut down some of it, but not all of it, because compaction is very hard to come back from. So there is actually a construction drawing now that shows the hall. It's called a hall road or a construction road, and then it shows the driveway that will be put in eventually. But this, I use photographs a lot to kind of notice things that I might not be noticing in just my looking. It reminds me, oh, there's going to be, you know, in this case I was thinking about the house foundation is just a dug, you know, rubble walls. That's going to have to get filled in. So I'm thinking, okay, I wouldn't have thought about that until I'm looking at this drawing and the house is half torn apart, and what's underneath there, and what are we going to put there, and what are we going to use that for? This also reminds me about things like there were 2 black walnut saplings. Black walnuts are very, very expensive wood, and so they're very prized. This property has been logged and logged and logged, so there's not a lot of big, nice old trees in it. And these 2 little saplings tell me that there had been a really beautiful big old black walnut, and before they sold it, they cut it down. They made sure that they collected that. And there's also a remnant apple that we'll find out in a few weeks if it's a volunteer, meaning a plant that just planted itself, or it's part of an old orchard. Was it part of and I think it's probably an old orchard. And then another site visit, we finally go out for a walk in the woods. And this is about the noticing part, right? This is watching, where does a client take me? They want to show me a whole bunch of stuff. We were looking at pathways. There are logging roads that are there, and those are visible because of the plants growing in them that show compaction and former use. But those can also be the start of a path system throughout this place. At one point, the client asked me about making the paths along the slopes down to this little trout stream are, not the paths, the path down, there isn't a path, it's very steep, and so you're kind of hanging onto trees as you skid down. And she was asking about how can we make a path, how can we cut a path into the hill. And this is one of the drawings that I did for her there. If you cut into the hill, you're a steep slope like that, you're just going to have everything erode, right? That you'll just cause the soil to wash into the stream. So one thing you can do is take a log, put it perpendicular to the slope, stake it, and over time, the leaves and twigs and branches will be flowing down the hill anyway, because when the rains come, they'll fit that, and they begin to collect behind this log, and that's how you can make a flattish area. So that's what this drawing is trying to explain, that if we were to do that, we would do this very sort of simple construction that is less invasive. And then finally, this is the swamp. This project is just in its beginning stages, but it's very beautiful, incredibly beautiful. And one of the other questions is, how do we get access to that? And how do we make that part of the easy daily experience without disrupting all of the landscape between here and there? So that's a kind of initial type of drawing that I do. Really, and at this scale, at other scales, it might be different levels of information, more detail-oriented than this is. But at this big scale, it does take a while to wrap my head around it, and using the LiDAR, using Google Earth, and going back to those things after I've been there is also very helpful. Like, I see more that's in there.